Lights will guide you home, but I promise I will burn for you. By rayrae118. Chapter 8. The next week, Harry hardly had any time to devote to his extracurricular activities. The first Quidditch match of the season was that weekend, and it was Gryffindor versus Slytherin. While it was true that the game might be a little more civilised without Malfoy and the upper years, who had made up the majority of the team last year before, the rivalry between those two houses was ingrained, and wouldn't change anytime soon. At least, now it was more likely to stay friendly and on the pitch, rather than in the corridors between classes. Harry knew that Theo had had his hands full picking an entirely new team. He was relieved, but not entirely surprised, that the new captain had failed to pick Crabbe and Goyle to return to their spots as beaters. The two troll-like boys, however, were less than thrilled. Harry had observed them muttering with Pansy Parkinson and a few seventh years in deserted hallways, which did nothing to set his mind at ease. He warned Blaise and Daphne to keep an eye on them, but beyond that, there wasn't much he could do. He mentioned his worries to Snape, managing to get the professor alone by staying after the class. But Snape nodded, saying, "I have noticed it as well," he admitted, rubbing a hand tightly across his face, as he surreptitiously put up a few privacy wards to keep any unwanted ears from hearing them. "I'll keep an eye on them." He gave a pointed look at Harry, and the teacher knew that meant Snape was using passive legitimacy to monitor their thoughts. "But I have had to at least some minor training in mind that information from getting into the wrong hands. Without a more concentrated attack, I wouldn't be able to find out what they're whispering about. Just observe, Potter. If you notice anything, don't keep it to yourself." Harry nodded and rushed off to catch up to his friends. Line break. Gryffindor dominated the field that Saturday. After 45 minutes of play, the Lions were up 100-10, and the snitch had yet to appear. After a brief time-out, Harry decided to switch up his team, to give the reserve members a chance to see some action. He put in Seamus for Dean as beater, and switched Natalie for Demelza. He wanted everyone to be comfortable playing in a real game, and it was better for them to get that experience when they were up by 90, rather than needing to go in because they were down a player and losing by 50. The next hour increased the margin by another 70 points, as Harry switched out reserves and starters several more times. Finally, Harry decided to put Slytherin out of their misery, and dropped into a steep dive, catching the snitch and cementing the final score at 350-40. The red and gold section burst into cheers as the team lowered to the ground. They were soon surrounded by students, clapping them on the back, shaking their hands and congratulating them. After a few minutes, Harry managed to make himself heard above the crowd. "Party in the common room!" he shouted to an approving roar. The team headed to the locker room while everyone else made their way back up to the castle. It was an interesting experience, Harry reflected as he changed out of his Quidditch gear, to play a game with Slytherin and not have to worry about foul play. For the first time, the Slytherin team was entirely friendly. Without Malfoy and his ilk, they were able to just play the game the way it should be played. While Theo Knott wasn't what one would call friendly, he wasn't on board with the Pureblast Supremacist Act, and he was able to get along with most people, and the new Slytherin team was built of more open-minded members of the house. Line break. The party that followed lasted well into the evening and early morning, with the entire house celebrating their victory. Harry had cajoled the house elves into supplying enough food to feed the entire school, and he and Ginny took one of the secret passages to Hogsmeade to provide the butterbeer. Everyone congratulated the new players, pleased with the team they had this year. Harry watched the gathering with a smile, off to the side with his friends. "It was a good move, putting in the reserves," Hermione commented, taking a sip from her drink. Harry nodded. "I thought it would be good to give them a chance to play. Experience and all that. Better when we're ahead, right?" "Exactly," Ron agreed. "Give them the opportunity to see what a real game's like, so that when we need them for some reason, they won't be completely green. It's a good strategy." Harry grinned. "Coming from the master of strategy himself, I'll take that as a great compliment." Ron turned beet red and took a large swallow with his drink. Minerva had to finally come up and tell them all to go to bed around 3 o'clock in the morning, but there was a slight smile on her face as she did so they knew she wasn't really mad. Line break. Early in the next week, Harry and Ginny were walking patrol after curfew, talking through their bond as they walked through the corridors. "I've been thinking of something," Harry said, his mental voice hesitant, something that caught Ginny's interest immediately. "What is it, Harry?" she asked curiously. Harry bit his lip. "The diary." Ginny froze, remembering her hellish first year. "What about it?" she asked uncertainly. Harry sighed. I was thinking about what it did." He saw Ginny flinch and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "What if there was more than just a memory preserved in a book?" Ginny frowned, her heart racing slightly. "You think Voldemort did something?" Harry nodded. "The more I think about it, the more I think there was more to that diary than just your memory. If it really was a memory, it wouldn't have been able to affect you the way it did." Ginny pursed her lips, thinking about it. "It does make sense," she replied slowly. "Should we talk to Snape?" Harry nodded. "I think that would be best. He might have an idea what kind of magic could have created the diary." They agreed to speak with the professor soon, and continued on their route. Line break. Keeping their promise to themselves, that weekend, Harry and Ginny once more found themselves in Snape's private quarters, speaking with the professor about things they had really wished they didn't have to worry about. Snape listened to their theories, or lack thereof, since they really had no idea what it could be beyond just an errant thought, with interest. When Harry finished speaking, he frowned thoughtfully. "Your speculation does make a sick sort of sense," he commented. "I know that diary set Albus jumping, but I didn't know why. It looks like you may be following his train of thought." Harry bit his lip. "Do you have any ideas?" he asked curiously. Snape nodded slightly. "A few ideas. Nothing concrete. I'll do some research and let you know." The teenagers had to be content with that, and they knew they would be looking into it as well. So they said their goodbyes and headed up to meet with their friends. They spent the day in the room of requirement, practicing occlumency and animagus training, or working on various assignments. Harry practiced his legilimency, and wasn't able to get any out of their minds without their consent, which made him happy. Ginny let him in willingly, and he spent most of the morning exploring her mind. That afternoon, he sent off a letter to Jason Holding, asking him for theories on how someone might go about rebuilding a mind. He thought improving with legilimency, and he wanted to start thinking about the next step of his plan. Legilimency was just one part of it. It would take a lot more than a basic grasp of the art to cure someone who had lost their mind to the Cruciatus curse. Line break. A few days later, he received a response, which, though helpful, didn't necessarily aid in his research. Instead, Jason gave him the name of a healer at St. Marco's who specialised in the Cruciatus curse, and who might have a better idea of how to go about rebuilding the mind, since she knew more about how the curse destroyed it than just about anyone. The answer he received from the healer was both thought-provoking and hopeful. "Dear Mr. Potter, I have been studying the Cruciatus curse for over 20 years now, and you somehow managed to summarise everything I've attempted to accomplish in just a few sentences. Most of the wizarding world is under the impression that this curse is irreversible. I believe there may yet be a cure. The key lies in the damaged mind itself, I believe. It is not simply a matter of learning legilimency. The art alone won't be enough to rebuild the mind. That kind of process would take more than the type of knowledge we have today. However, I do believe you are correct in your train of thought. The situation may very well lie in the art of legilimency, but there is more to it than simply being able to see into the damaged mind. We have attempted this before, and there simply seems to be no way to rebuild what has been destroyed. I would very much be interested in speaking with you more about your ideas. If you have a thought on how to further our progress, I would love to hear them. Healer Jessica Winsby, someone goes. Harry knew the healer was correct. Legilimency alone wouldn't solve anything. What he needed to do was evolve the art into something more. He briefly considered the idea of writing to Augusta Longbottom to let her know what he was planning, but he tossed it as quickly as it had occurred to him. For the same reason he wasn't telling Neville, he didn't want to tell Augusta. He would hate it if she built up false hope, and he just let her down. Line break. As the rest of the school attended the Ravenclaw vs Hufflepuff Quidditch game on the second to last Saturday of November, Harry and Ginny quietly separated themselves from the rest of the crowd and made their way down to the dungeons. Snape let them set up several privacy wards before gesturing for them to take a seat. I have been doing quite a lot of research since you came here with your theories. When you told me about the diary, some possibilities presented themselves. I wanted to ask a few more questions, but I think I might know what the Dark Lord did. He paused and looked almost sorry at what he had to do next. Miss Weasley, can you tell me about what happened when you wrote in the diary? Ginny took a deep breath. It felt almost like he was pulling my soul out of me, using me to come back to life. Every time I wrote in it, I felt a little less human. Harry took her hand and squeezed it reassuringly. Snape nodded, like that was the answer he had expected to hear. Have either of you ever heard of a horcrux? The teenagers shook their heads and Snape sighed. I didn't think so. In plain terms, creating a horcrux is one of the most heinous crimes a person can commit. Basically, it is a vessel in which someone hides a portion of their soul. It is an insurance policy, I believe the Muggles would say. If the person were to be killed, the horcrux would stop their soul from passing on. And they would be able to come back, Harry whispered. Snape nodded again, this time more soberly. I believe the diary may have been one such vessel. But then, if it was destroyed, wouldn't that solve the problem? Ginny asked, feeling a little calmer when Harry rubbing small circles on the palm of her hand. Harry shook his head, knowing what Snape was thinking. Not if the bastard made more than one. Snape sighed. The Dark Lord is a megalomaniac. He is a narcissist. He wouldn't have stopped at just one. How does one go about making a horcrux? Ginny asked curiously. She wondered why more people didn't try to use this as a way to stop from dying. Based on what she was hearing, there was probably a good reason for that. Snape's eyes darkened, and Harry sucked in a breath. Murder, he breathed. That's how, isn't it? Snape nodded, agreeing. One creates a horcrux by taking a life. There is a ritual involved, but the process includes sending an innocent soul along in place of your own. It is horrendous, and then it does not surprise me that the Dark Lord would choose to employ this safeguard. There was a heavy silence permeating the air as they processed the information that had been uncovered in that conversation. Both Snape and Ginny looked strangely as Harry let out a snort. I wonder who cursed you, Professor, he commented. Snape raised an eyebrow, confused. As far as he knew, he hadn't been cursed recently. Harry chuckled, knowing that the Professor was thinking literally. There's this old Chinese curse, pretty well known in the Muggle world, that goes, May you live in interesting times, he explained. Snape nodded, understanding. Whoever it was, they had better hope I never catch up to them. Harry and Ginny laughed. I hope you'll let me get in a few shots as well, Harry said, calming down. I'm all for a little excitement and adventure, but I could go without the megalomaniac trying to kill me. Ginny rolled her eyes. I think we all could. After another minute of silence, Harry sighed. So we have to find out how many of these horcruxes Voldemort created, where they are, what they are, and that's not even getting into finding them and destroying them. He shook his head. It sounds like an impossible task. And, yeah, I can't help but feel hopeful. Snape looked at him like he was crazy, but Ginny nodded, thoughtfully. For the first time, I feel like this war can be won. You're right, Harry. It sounds incredibly impossible. But now we have an idea of what to do to stop him. Harry grinned at his girlfriend. Did you hear what you just said, Gin? We can win. He looked at Snape. We can win, he repeated, his voice steely and determined, his eyes overly bright. For the first time in almost 2 decades, Snape actually felt hopeful. This war under Harry's lead gave him so much more surety than Albus's twinkling eyes and false promises. In just a few weeks, Harry had come up with a way to beat the Dark Lord, once and for all. No prophecy, no second chances, just certainty. The defense professor actually felt himself smiling as he nodded, his obsidian eyes meeting and holding Harry's bright green gaze. We have a chance, he said, his voice barely over a whisper. All 3 of them felt the immensity of those words settle around them, the responsibility of what they had to do, the knowledge that they held. Realistically speaking, they could make or break this war. With what they knew, they could actually end this. Snape coughed. You should get back to mingle with crowds returning from the match. I believe it goes without saying that we have discussed here should not leave this room. Harry bit his lip. I won't keep secrets from my friends. I was planning on telling them. I just wanted to run the theory by you first. I think you could be a great asset, with your role in the last war and this one. But the 3 of us can't do this alone. He smiled slightly and looked down a few inches into Ginny's comforting gaze. It took me a long time to realise that I don't have to do everything by myself. He looked back at Snape, his gaze fiery. Together, we're stronger. Snape sighed and nodded. I do understand that, Harry. I just don't want to risk any word of this getting out. Can you imagine what could happen if the Dark Lord were to discover what we know? Harry winced, but acquiesced. If and when we discuss this, I promise we'll employ every privacy ward and charm that we can. We've got a room that we can use that we can set to not let anyone in without our consent. Most of us have rock-hard occlumency shields, and the rest are getting there. I think within the next couple of months, they'll be there, and I'll share everything. I think we should think about how to utilise everyone's best before we act, Ginny commented idly. When Harry and Snape looked at her, she elaborated. It will do no good to give them all this information if we don't know how we're going to go about using it. Each one of our friends has their own strengths and weaknesses. We need to be smart about this. Professor Snape is right. If word of this were to leak out, it could be catastrophic. Harry nodded grimly. Understood. We'll form a plan first. Maybe by the Christmas holidays, we'll have a better idea. He stood up, pulled Ginny up with him. Thank you for hearing us out, Professor. And if we come up with any ideas, we'll let you know. But we should get back to the crowds. I think we've outlasted the game at this point. Indeed, they could hear the muted sounds of voices coming from above them, indicating that the Quidditch match was over and students were returning to the castle. Snape took down the wards and watched the 2 teenagers left. He felt much wearier than he had before their visit. But, despite that, he couldn't help but feel like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in over 20 years, they had a chance. Line break. Ravenclaw had won the Quidditch match, in what sounded like a very close race, according to Ron, who gave the team captain a play-by-play account of everything he had missed. As captain, Harry was grateful, since he got the opportunity to hear about the 2 teams they still had yet to play. As the castle died down in the aftermath of the Quidditch hype, Hogwarts entered to December, and the last 2 weeks of term. Harry and his friends were busy studying as ever, though Harry and Ginny also spent some time what little time they could, discussing their newfound knowledge and their talk with Snape. Blaise, Luna and Daphne were getting pretty good with occlumency, and Harry thought they would probably be as good as they could get by Christmas. He told them all to contact Jason and set up a time where he could test their shields over the Christmas break. Just to be certain. His own legilimency was getting pretty good as well, and he was becoming very savvy at navigating the mind. Ginny was the only one who really felt comfortable letting him in, but he had learned a bit in his testing of the others. 2 weeks before the break, Harry and the others received an invitation to yet another Slughorn party, this one a Christmas get-together. Word was Slughorn was inviting a few graduated students that he had taught back in the day. Ginny had a bit of a fangirl moment when she heard the rumour that Gwenog Jones, captain of the Holyhead Harpies, was going to be there. Harry still wasn't sure, but he agreed to attend, in the spirit of the holiday. He didn't really have an excuse, after all, since the school would be going into break just a few days later, so there was no pressing need to schedule a Quidditch practice. The same sort of reasoning went for having to study. When Harry told the others that he and Ginny were going, they were quick to accept their invites as well. The big talk of the days leading to the party was Neville asking Hannah Abbott to go as his girlfriend. He and Susan had been one of the well-known couples of last year, right up there with Harry and Ginny and Ron and Hermione. The gossip mill had run rampant after their breakup, and the fact that Neville was now dating Susan's roommate was a great source of interest. It annoyed all the affected parties, but they tried to ignore it. Susan had squashed down the jealousy she felt when Hannah came into their room, squealing about how Neville had asked her to be his girlfriend, and the next day accepted a date with Theo Knott when he asked her to the party. Line break. When Harry and Ginny arrived in the room Slughorn had set up for the party, he took a moment to look around, impressed despite himself. The room had been dressed with gold hangings on the windows, gold streamers cascading down from the ceiling, interspersed with shimmering stars. One long table was set along the far wall, almost groaning under the amount of food. He escorted Ginny back in that direction, nodding at a few friends he saw in the crowd. There were a surprising number of people who were older, guests that Slughorn had invited, probably students he had taught once upon a time. "Harry! Ginny!" The two looked over at the sound of their names, and smiled at Blaise and Luna, who were getting something to drink. Luna was dressed in a set of dress robes that were very her. They were navy blue and sparkly, with sleeves draped down and widening at the ends, almost hiding her hands from view. It was an Empire-style waist, and even though Harry probably wouldn't have chosen it for himself, he thought it looked nice on her. At least she'd left her radish earrings in her room. "Hey," Harry greeted as they joined the pair. Blaise nodded. "You look nice, Ginny. Did you guys coordinate or something?" They looked at each other and chuckled, ruefully, as they realised they did indeed match. Ginny was wearing an emerald green dress with just a hint of sparkle on the top when the light hit it. It cut off abruptly at the knee and showed off her slim and athletic figure quite well. Harry was wearing black trousers with an emerald green buttoned-up shirt. Ron and Hermione joined them at that moment, Ron immediately gravitating towards the food, as Harry and Ginny complimented Hermione's dress. It was a lavender colour, with ruffles on one side of the skirt that tied up in a little knot at the waist. As the evening continued to pass, Harry had to admit he was actually having a good time. Throughout the term, he kept his word to observe their potions professor without making any snap judgments. He could see that Slughorn knew what he was talking about in the classroom. He had no issues with a man as a professor. It was the rest of it that he wasn't all that fond of. Slughorn had his favourites, just like Sirius had said, and it clearly showed, in ways that he would pay attention to certain members of different classes more than the others. He didn't think the man was bad or evil. He just wished he wouldn't act so... Oh, who was Harry kidding? Slughorn was acting like a Slytherin. There wasn't really anything wrong with that. Harry just wasn't overly fond of the potions master's way of going about it. But he was learning to live with it. And while he wouldn't be calling on Slughorn to watch his back in a fight anytime soon, he did think the man was worthy of some level of trust. Or at least he didn't think he had to keep an extra eye out for the man. Speaking of, Slughorn chose that moment to pop up beside Harry. smiling jovially at the group of students standing there. "Harry, so glad you could come." He reached out and pulled the young woman forward. "I'd like to introduce you to a former student of mine. Gwenog, this is Harry Potter." Gwenog Jones, captain of the Holyhead Harpies, smiled tightly, nodding at Harry and looking around at the others. Slughorn coughed slightly. "Well, I'm sure you both would have a lot in common. You're both such fantastic Quidditch players after all. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my other guests. Cheerio!" He disappeared back into the crowd and Gwenog rolled her eyes. "Sorry about that," she said to Harry. "He means well. He's just a little—" Words seemed to fail her, but Harry nodded in understanding. "Yeah, he is," he agreed. Gwenog smiled, this time a little more genuinely. "He was right, though. We do have a little in common. I heard about your Quidditch exploits. You've got some great moves under your belt." Harry blushed slightly, but smiled at his thanks. Next to him, Ginny seemed to be in a state of shock. Her dream was to play for the Holyhead Harpies, and here was the team's captain, standing right there, talking like one person to another. Harry looked over at his girlfriend, amused by her silence. She wasn't normally so starstruck, but he knew that she really wanted to play Quidditch professionally, so he understood her stunned silence. "This is my girlfriend Ginny," he introduced, nudging the redhead slightly. "She's a chaser, and a damn good one at that." Gwenog raised an eyebrow. "It's nice to meet you, Ginny. You like to play?" Ginny coughed and nodded, trying to snap out of it. "Oh, yes," she grinned. "I'd love to play professionally." Gwenog tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps I'll make a trip up here for a game sometime. If you're any good, I'm sure we'd love to have you." Ginny felt her heart soar. "I'd appreciate that," she replied. "I know how hard it is to actually get into a game as a pro." Gwenog nodded, agreeing. "It is difficult, but if you've got the talent and the drive, I'm sure you'll make it." Ginny smiled. "Thanks," she blushed. Gwenog glanced around the room. "It was nice to meet you, Harry, Ginny, but I think I've done enough socializing for the night. I'm sure I'll see you again sometime." She shook both their hands before disappearing into the crowd. Ginny felt hot all of a sudden, and Harry smirked. "Starstruck?" he asked impishly. Ginny growled slightly and shoved him playfully. "Shut up!" she muttered. "Gwenog Jones is like my idol. You know how much I'd love to play with the Harpies." Harry nodded, pulling an arm around her shoulders. "I know, Gin," he soothed. "I was just teasing. She seems like a nice person." Ginny smiled. "Yeah, I hope she does come to see a game sometime. I do have a couple of years, though." Harry nodded, and they headed off to get another drink. A while later found Harry and Ginny alone near the refreshments table. Their friends had gone to disperse with various contacts of Slughorns. Hermione had introduced herself to a renowned author of Transfiguration textbooks, including the one they were using for the current school year, while Ron dutifully stood by her side, trying to be interested in the conversation as he ate his way through a plate of snacks. Blaise and Daphne had met a renowned potions mistress, and were thoroughly engaged in the fascinated conversation, while Luna was talking animatedly about mystical creatures with an older gentleman, and Neville was speaking with a woman about something that appeared to be quite interesting, if his eager expression was anything to go by, while Hannah listened, seeming to feign interest if Harry judged her polite smile correctly. Susan had apparently left Theo talking to some of his friends, and decided to join Hermione and Ron. Harry noticed as his observant gaze swept over the room once more. Harry and Ginny were content to talk with each other for a while, both of them feeling tired from all the socializing. Harry looked up at something, Ginny said, and then furrowed his brow, as he noted an older man helping himself to some food from the table they were standing beside. He recognized the man from a picture on the back of a book he had read while studying the Wolfsbane potion. Harry moved forward quickly. "Mr. Bumblebee?" he asked hesitantly. The man looked up, startled, and then his eyes widened almost comically. "Mr. Potter!" Harry nodded sheepishly. "Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself. I've done a lot of research on the Wolfsbane potion, and I think you did a great thing by inventing it. Thank you." Damocles Belby, the inventor of the Wolfsbane potion, nodded courteously. "It is I who should be thanking you, Mr. Potter. Professor Snape has told me of your improvements and their success. Congratulations! It really was quite a feat." Harry blushed, and Ginny smiled, leaning into his side. Belby nodded again. Have you considered a career in potions development, Mr. Potter? Harry shrugged. Not really, he admitted. I've got a lot of interests. Belby smiled slightly. Well, if you ever want to talk ideas and potions, please contact me. It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Potter. Harry grinned and took the hand that Belby offered. You as well, Mr. Belby. Ginny reached out and drew Harry closer to her, her hand tightening across his waist. Harry looked down at her warm gaze and smiled. Ginny nodded decisively. What more confirmation do you need, Harry? A renowned potions master just told you how talented you are. You did good, Potter, so embrace it. Harry shook his head slightly, but kept smiling. Yes, dear. End of chapter. Hi, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Oh, boy. So talking about the horcruxes now. A year early. Very, very nice. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. And I liked that introduction with Gwenorg Jones and Mr. Belby. I really liked that. I love that the author remembered to put that in, because Belby, working with the Wolfsbane potion, that's a brilliant bit of lore. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!